Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. Let's get into today's story. The real estate developer pulled up to a crumbling waterfront warehouse in a $400,000 Bentley Continental. His 26-year-old girlfriend, perched in the passenger seat like a hood ornament, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had a check for $30,000 in his breast pocket, a smirk already arranged on his face, and one singular, pathetic goal: to watch his ex-wife's expression crack when she realized how far she had fallen. He had not called ahead. He had not sent a letter. He had simply driven across the Nashville city limits with Tatum beside him, because some humiliations, Vincent Hale believed, needed to be delivered in person. He had no idea that the building he was about to enter had just been quietly appraised at $14 million. And he had absolutely no idea that the soft-spoken woman who had spent the last 4 years sitting in near total silence, the woman his own mother had described as a decorative piece of furniture that had finally been donated, was the sole founder of a hospitality design firm whose client waitlist stretched 18 months long and whose last project had been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest. Vincent knew none of this because he had never, in 11 years of marriage, thought to ask his wife what she actually did when he wasn't watching. His name was Vincent Hale. He was 49 years old, tanned, silver-templed, and built with the kind of broad-shouldered confidence that comes from having been told you were exceptional by everyone around you since approximately the 3rd grade. He ran Hale and Meridian Development, a commercial real estate firm that had made him extremely comfortable, and more importantly, to Vincent, extremely visible. His face appeared on billboards along I-65. He was quoted in the Nashville Business Journal on a quarterly basis. He had once been photographed shaking hands with the governor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. And he kept a framed copy of that photograph on the credenza directly behind his desk, positioned so it appeared in every video call. He was, in the most purely architectural sense of the word, a facade, all gleaming surface, nothing load-bearing underneath. The woman he had discarded was named Delia Marsh. She was 41. She had a quiet face that people routinely underestimated. Not plain, but composed, the kind of face that didn't perform for the room. She had dark, steady eyes and a way of going still when other people got loud that some people found unnerving and others found magnetic, depending entirely on whether they had ever been on the receiving end of her full attention. During their marriage, Delia had been the invisible infrastructure. She had raised their 2 children while building her firm from a single-room office in East Nashville with second-hand drafting tables and a laptop that overheated if she ran more than 3 programs at once. She had developed a proprietary method for spatial acoustics in hospitality spaces, the science of making a restaurant or hotel lobby feel intimate and warm rather than cold and cavernous, that had quietly, steadily made her one of the most sought-after names in her niche. Vincent had called it her little hobby. When she had shown him a profile piece that an industry publication wanted to run on her work, he had smiled with his teeth and suggested she not let it go to her head. When the divorce came 3 years ago, he had arrived at mediation with a team of lawyers and a posture of bored contempt. He had offered her a settlement structured around the assumption that she was financially dependent on him, because he had never bothered to look at her bank statements, her client contracts, or the name of the LLC she had incorporated 4 years before they separated. Delia had taken what he offered. She had not argued. She had signed where her attorney indicated and walked out of the mediation room in a pair of worn leather flats, carrying a canvas tote bag, looking, by all outward appearances, like a woman who had been quietly reduced to nothing. She had driven directly from the mediation to this warehouse on the Cumberland River. She had paid cash. The building had been a wreck. Roof compromised, electrical condemned, floorboards soft with water damage. The previous owner, an elderly man named George Patton, who had zero connection to the general and had been quietly annoyed about the confusion his entire life, had been trying to sell the thing for 6 years. The location was exceptional, river-facing, half a mile from downtown, on a block that every developer in the city was watching, but hadn't moved on yet, because the building itself looked like a liability wrapped in rotting timber. Delia had seen something else entirely. She had seen the bones. She spent the next 3 years rebuilding it herself. Not literally. She had a contractor she trusted named Lou Ferreira, who had worked with her on 4 previous projects. But architecturally, legally, and financially, it was entirely her vision, her capital, and her name on the deed. She was in the building when the Bentley pulled up. She was on the third floor, reviewing finish samples for the south-facing guest suites, when her phone buzzed with a text from the building's ground floor reception desk. "Mrs. Marsh, there's a man here named Vincent Hale. He says you know him. He has a woman with him." He didn't call ahead. "Do you want me to send them up or tell him you're unavailable?" Delia read the message twice. She set the finish sample, a slab of honed Venetian plaster in a color she had mixed specifically to catch the river light, at 4 in the afternoon, carefully back on the table. She smoothed her linen shirt. She texted back, "Send them up. Thank you, Cora." She had known in the abstract that this day would come eventually. Vincent operated on a schedule dictated entirely by his own ego, and the news that her building was nearing completion had been quietly circulating in Nashville development circles for several weeks. Someone had told him. Someone always told him. She walked to the window and looked out at the river for a moment. The water was steel gray and calm. A barge moved slowly upstream. She thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had cultivated deliberately over the last 3 years as a form of armor. Then she heard the elevator. The building's elevator was original industrial, a massive cage of wrought iron and reclaimed steel that Delia had preserved deliberately. Both for the character it lent the space, and because she knew, from experience, that the machinery made a sound on a scent that was low and resonant, and slightly ominous if you didn't know what it was. She had watched it unsettle 3 separate investors. She found this privately satisfying. The elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor. Vincent stepped out first. He was wearing a sport coat over a collared shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, which was his standard uniform, for occasions where he wanted to appear casually powerful. He looked around the floor with the expression of a man who has decided in advance to be unimpressed. Tatum followed, wobbling slightly on heeled sandals that were not designed for a construction-adjacent environment. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse tucked into tailored wide-legged trousers, her dark hair styled into waves that suggested she had been to a salon that morning. She looked objectively very young and very expensive. She also looked mildly horrified by the exposed brick and the smell of fresh plaster. Delia was standing near the center of the floor, in front of a 10-foot section of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked directly out over the river. The afternoon light came through and turned everything in the room a particular shade of amber that Delia had specifically engineered by selecting the window glazing and the angle of the exterior fins during the design phase. She looked, in that light, like someone who had been placed there on purpose, which she had. "Vincent," she said. She did not move toward him. "I didn't know you were coming. Thought I'd stop by," he said, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man who considers unannounced arrivals a power move rather than a social violation. His eyes swept the floor. Despite himself, his jaw tightened slightly. "Quite a project, thank you." Tatum, who clearly felt that the social situation required her to establish relevance, stepped forward and extended a hand. "I'm Tatum, Vincent's fiancée." She said the last word with the particular emphasis people use when they want you to register that something has been formalized. Delia said. She shook the hand once briefly. "I know who you are." Tatum blinked. She had expected something more reactive. Vincent had been scanning the room. His real estate brain was calculating involuntarily. Ceiling height, square footage, the quality of the finishes. He had done enough deals to recognize when something was genuinely exceptional. And what he was seeing was genuinely exceptional, which was causing him significant internal discomfort because it did not fit the narrative he had constructed. "What's the cap rate on something like this?" he asked, which was his way of asserting that he could have done this too if he'd wanted to. "It's not an income property," Delia said simply. He frowned. "Then what is it?" "It's mine," she said. There was a pause. The river light shifted slightly as a cloud moved somewhere overhead. Tatum leaned close to Vincent and murmured something. He reached into his breast pocket and removed an envelope. He held it out toward Delia with a practiced air of generosity that he had clearly rehearsed in the car. "I'm actually here for a practical reason," he said. "There's an issue with the deed transfer from the settlement. My attorneys found a small discrepancy. The parcel boundary on the east side of your property here overlaps by about 4 feet with a lot I've been holding since 2019. It's a technicality, but I need you to sign a corrected boundary agreement before I move forward with a sale I have in the works." He held the envelope out a little further. "And I want to be fair about it. There's a check in there, $30,000, which is more than generous for 4 feet of gravel and river sediment. Sign the agreement, take the check, and we're done." Delia looked at the envelope. She did not take it. Which parcel? She said. Lot 14C, the eastern boundary. I know Lot 14C, Delia said. She tilted her head slightly. Vincent, that parcel doesn't overlap with this property. He gave a small, tolerant laugh. I've had surveyors on it twice. The records clearly show, Delia said, that Lot 14C has a shared boundary with the building to the north of me, which is a storage facility owned by a logistics company called Farrow and Crane. Not with this address. She paused. Your surveyors have the wrong building. Vincent's tolerant smile developed a slight fracture. Tatum, who had been examining a piece of original industrial pipe that Delia had deliberately preserved as an architectural feature, looked over with mild confusion. That can't be right, Vincent said, his voice sharpening. I'm looking at a plot map. I'd
happy to show you the record deed,
Delia said pleasantly. I have the title documentation in the office downstairs. We can go look at it together if you'd like. There was a silence. Vincent had not expected this level of specificity. He had expected grief or confusion, or at minimum, the kind of deferential uncertainty that Delia had exhibited consistently throughout 11 years of marriage whenever he had asserted something with enough confidence. He recalibrated. Fine, he said. Let's say the boundary is as you describe. There's still the matter of the access easement. When you renovated, your contractor extended the loading dock by 8 feet onto a right-of-way that I hold a recorded easement over. My attorneys have it documented. Lou Ferreira pulled every easement on record before he broke ground, Delia said. Her voice was still pleasant. The right-of-way you're referring to was vacated by the city in 2021 when they reconfigured the Riverside trail system. The vacation was recorded. The easement dissolved with it. Another silence. Tatum looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at Delia. Something behind his eyes was shifting. The bored, conquering certainty being replaced by something he recognized after a moment as the specific unpleasant sensation of a deal going sideways. You seem to know an awful lot about the legal status of your property, he said, and now his voice had an edge that he was making no real effort to smooth over. I've been here for 3 years, Delia said. I know every inch of this building. I know every document in its chain of title. I know the names of the 3 previous owners, the outcome of a 1987 zoning dispute involving the parcel on the corner, and the thickness of every wall. She looked at him steadily. I built this. Of course I know it. Tatum had stopped examining the industrial pipe. She was looking at Delia with an expression that had moved, without her appearing to realize it, from dismissal to something more complicated. Look, Vincent said, and now he dropped the professional veneer entirely. His voice taking on the blunt, private register he reserved for conversations he considered beneath formal posturing. I'm going to be straight with you, Delia. I have a buyer, a serious buyer, Regional Hospitality Group. They're putting together a portfolio of river-facing properties for boutique hotel conversion. They want this block. They've wanted it for 8 months. And right now, the weakest link in the assembly is this building, because you own it and you're not selling. He paused. I can make this work for both of us. Tell me what you need. What's your number? Delia was quiet for a moment. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a breath or two, looking out at the river. When she turned around, there was a quality in her face that Vincent could not immediately categorize. It was not hostility. It was not excitement. It was the expression of a person who has been waiting a specific amount of time for a specific thing to happen, and it has now happened, right on schedule. What's the group? She said. Pardon, the hospitality group. What's the name of the company? He hesitated. Varden Collective. Delia nodded slowly. She reached into the front pocket of her linen trousers and removed her phone. She opened an email, scrolled briefly, and held the screen out so he could read it. Vincent stepped forward and looked at the phone. The email was from a woman named Claudine Mercer, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Varden Collective. It was dated 11 days ago. The subject line read, Delia Marsh, Design Partnership and Building Acquisition Proposal, Confidential. He read the first paragraph. Then he read it again. The room was very quiet. The river light continued to do what it did at 4 in the afternoon, which was to make everything in the space look considered and inevitable. They reached out to me directly, Delia said, taking the phone back and sliding it into her pocket. 6 weeks ago, actually, through my firm's website. They'd seen the Architectural Digest piece. She looked at him with that same calm, measuring expression. They don't want your block assembly, Vincent. They want this building specifically, and they don't want to buy it from a developer and convert it. She let the pause sit for a moment. They want to partner with the person who designed it. They want to hire my firm to design the interiors of their next 4 properties. And they want to acquire this building with me as a retained creative partner and minority equity holder. Vincent stared at her. The term sheet was fully executed last Friday, Delia said. My attorney filed it Monday morning. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Those had been the pauses of a negotiation. This one was the sound of a narrative collapsing. Vincent Hale had spent the drive from his Brentwood office to this building constructing a very specific story in which he was the architect of this encounter, the one with leverage, with resources, with the accumulated power of 20 years of commercial development. He had imagined, with some relish, the moment Delia would look at the check and feel the gap between where she was and where he had ended up. He had brought Tatum partly as a witness and partly as a prop, because having a beautiful young fiancée present at moments like this was, in his experience, a useful visual reminder of who had won. He had not anticipated being the person in the room who didn't know the deal was already done. Tatum had gone very still. She was looking between them with the expression of someone who has just realized that the movie she thought she was watching is a completely different genre than the one that is actually playing. You already closed, Vincent said. His voice sounded flatter than he intended. I've been in conversation with them for 6 weeks, Delia repeated. The building was always going to be the anchor. I just needed to be sure they were the right partner before I signed anything. She looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite satisfaction. More like the calm recognition one feels when a proof that has always been true finally gets formally verified. The check I received from Varden on Monday was the initial earnest deposit. It was 38 times what you have in that envelope. Vincent looked down at the envelope in his hand. He had been holding it this whole time, the way you keep holding a coffee cup long after you've realized the coffee has gone completely cold. I came here thinking, he started, and then stopped, because he wasn't entirely sure how that sentence ended in a way he was willing to say out loud. I know why you came, Delia said quietly. She did not say it with anger. She said it the way you state a fact that both parties already know, one that doesn't require emotional performance to be true. You came because you heard the building was almost done, and you decided I must have gotten lucky, or borrowed money I couldn't afford, or somehow stumbled into something that would eventually collapse and prove what you've always believed. She paused. You brought Tatum because you wanted a witness, she said. You brought the check because you wanted me to need it. Tatum had the grace to look uncomfortable. The Louis Vuitton bag slid off her shoulder, and she caught it, pulling it back up with both hands, in a gesture that suddenly looked less like accessorizing and more like holding on to something. 3 years ago, Delia said, you sat across from me in that mediation room, and you accepted a settlement that was, by any reasonable standard, deeply unfair to me, and you did it because you were absolutely certain I didn't have the capacity to do anything meaningful with what I walked away with. You thought the house was the asset. You didn't notice the company. You didn't notice that my firm's client list had 12 active contracts. You didn't notice the LLC. You signed the final documents in 11 minutes because you had somewhere else to be. She looked at him without flinching. I let you. Vincent opened his mouth, closed it. I didn't fight for a better settlement, Delia continued, because I didn't need one. I needed you to leave. And I needed you to feel certain you'd won, so that you'd go build your next thing and leave me alone to build mine. She glanced toward the window, then back. Sterling was the right city for you to get loud in. I needed the quiet. She walked to the elevator and pressed the call button. The cage descended with that low, resonant hum. I wish you well with your block assembly, Vincent. Genuinely, I hope your buyer holds. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Cora will show you out. Vincent walked to the elevator. He was not entirely sure when he had started moving, or whether he had made a conscious decision to go, but his feet were carrying him there, which felt like the only functional part of his body at the moment. He stepped in. Adam followed, her heels clicking on the iron grate. She did not make eye contact with Delia. The doors closed. The descent was quiet except for the machinery. On the street, they stood on the sidewalk next to the Bentley for a moment without speaking. The afternoon had gotten cooler. The river air came off the water with a smell of mud and distance. Babe, Tatum said finally. Don't, Vincent said. She didn't. He got in the car. She got in the car. The Bentley pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Upstairs, Delia stood at the window with the river in front of her and the building around her. Every ceiling, every seam in the brick, every carefully chosen slab of reclaimed oak underfoot, and felt the specific quiet satisfaction of someone who has spent 3 years building a thing that was always going to hold. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Claudine Mercer from Varden Collective. She answered on the second ring. "Claudine, Delia, I just heard from our legal team. The escrow cleared. It's official." A pause and then warmth breaking through the professional tone. "Welcome to the partnership." Delia looked out at the river. The barge that had been moving upstream earlier was gone now, around the bend and out of sight. "Thank you," she said. She ended the call. She walked back to the finished samples she had been reviewing before the elevator arrived. She picked up the slab of Venetian plaster in the color she had mixed, specifically for the afternoon light, held it at the angle she intended, and watched the river's reflection move across its surface. It was exactly right. It had always been exactly right. She had known it the first morning she walked into this building 4 years ago, when it was still full of rotting timber and broken glass, and every reasonable person she consulted told her it was a money pit and a legal headache and completely wrong for what she was trying to do. She had stood in the middle of the ruin that morning and felt with the particular certainty that only comes from knowing your own eye that what everyone else saw as broken was actually just unfinished. She had been patient. She had been quiet. She had built it anyway. The river light moved across the plaster and across the floor and across the room. Delia Marsh set the sample back on the table, picked up her pen, and went back to work.